Before playing an LA crook in Jane Foley's 2003 crime caper Confidence, Dustin Hoffman stars as an LA ex-convict in director Ulu Grosbard's third feature film after the subject was Roses and Who is Harry Kellerman and Why is he saying those terrible things about me, which also starred Hoffman in the lead role. This film is based on a novel, No Beast So Fierce, by ex-con turned author Edward Bunker, most notable for portraying Mr. Blue in Quentin Tarantino's directorial debut, Reservoir Dogs. Bunker would adapt his work with Oscar-winning Julia screenwriter Alvin Sargent alongside first-time Hollywood writer Jeffrey Boam, who would go on to pen more mainstream fare like The Lost Boys, Lethal Weapon 2, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, before succumbing to heart failure at the age of 53. So the film opens in a correctional facility one morning, and out comes recently released convict Max Dembo, played by a two-time Oscar winner who didn't have much luck with a certain HBO series. Anyway, after hitching a ride by pickup, Max is dropped off by bus at night as a mustachioed felon walks the street for a taste of freedom, which would only cost 65 cents.
That's when things made sense.
Dembo reaches a payphone about a parole meeting, and the next day we'll be introduced to parole officer Earl Frank, played by the sleazy private eye who tried to end Francis McDormand's whole career. Anyway, the parolee becomes a problem as he shows up late to the appointment, as well as being a no-show at the halfway house after a 6-year stint for armed burglary. But Max adds more fuel to the dumpster fire that is his life, as he marches to the beat of his own drum rather than adhering to authority, an issue which plagued him since being a 12-year-old juvenile delinquent. But the career criminal laments his rebellion and promises to reform for good.
Bullshit.
Upon hearing his meaningless mea culpa, Earl levels with Max that if he can find a place in employment by the end of the week, he'll let the halfway house hullabaloo slide. And Max is halfway to the road to redemption as he finds a hotel for $18 a week.
You're broke!
Later, Max meets a young, beautiful employment agent about a job by the name of Jenny Mercer, played by Theresa Russell, who's nearly 20 years Dustin Hoffman's junior and nearly 30 years of her late director ex-husband Nicholas Rogue. May-December romances aside, Max is forthcoming about his criminal status and desperately pleads for a clean slate, as well as getting some action he's missed since prison.
Listen, if I get this job, can I celebrate by taking you to dinner?
But after striking up a potential romance, Max returned to his flophouse for a bromance as he called an old ex-con acquaintance of his by the name of Willie Darren, played by Gary Busey, who once had a promising career and was nominated for an Oscar in the same year. Weezer subjects aside, Max continues violating his parole by meeting wayward Willie and his family, including son Henry, played by his real-life son who'd peak in Starship Troopers, and wife Selma, played by future Oscar winner Kathy Bates. Hobbling fanatics aside, Les Rubenesque Annie Wilkes tells Captain Crook that she's uncomfortable with his parolee presence and that his incarcerated influence may rub off on her hubby.
Damn right.
But little does she know that her straight-era hubby has another love in his life, as is revealed he's secretly hooked on horse.
Uh-oh.
Another parole violation notwithstanding, the only thing Max is high on his life as he works at a can manufacturing factory and goes out on a date with a lovely woman with low standards. Their romantic evening goes well until the cheapskate sees the bill and has to go Dutch with his lady friend.
You are one pathetic loser.
But after that disastrous date, Max might be due for a court date as his parole officer snoops around his hotel room, finds matches, and suspects the parolee of drug abuse.
Uh-oh.
Earl inspects Max for any track marks, for which he finds none, but ends up handcuffing Max to the bed anyway.
Son of a bitch!
Max finds himself back in the system as Jenny awaits her pen pal's freedom like she doesn't have better options. Anyway, the low-maintenance lady gives her loser suitor her number before Dembo is released after passing his drug test. Although innocent of any Bill Burroughs activities, Earl Frank is still curious about the junk in his room and wants the parolee to sing like a canary. But like Neil McCauley in Heat, Max chooses his fate as a criminal as he unleashes his rage on his parole officer like it's a Fury Road.
You feel that sting, big boy, huh? That's pride fucking with you, see?
In the coup de grace when Max pulls over to the side of the freeway and gives his fellow motorists an impromptu striptease. After that middle-aged Chippendale show on the road, Mad Max pursues crime full-time when he meets an underworld associate named Manny, obtains a piece of shit pistol, and robs some hard-working Asian Americans at a grocery store.
Barely.
Though the model minority's American dream is shattered, they get off much easier than O-Dog's Asiatic victims and menace to society. But after the half-cocked holdup, the fugitive felon reunites with his dingbat damsel and becomes candid yet again about his criminal exploits, with Jenny being pretty chill about the whole ordeal, despite the ramifications of aiding and abetting.
Take my chances.
After leaving his laissez-faire lady, Max meets Mickey, another ex-con played by the ex-con author who adapted his novel for which this movie is based on. Anyway, the least known Reservoir Dog discusses a poker job he can rip off, particularly with a partner who's not shooting up all the time. But in the meantime, the only partner in crime in mind is Jenny as Max, wearing the same outfit, breaks and enters into her unlocked abode, which barely startles the laid-back lady.
That scare you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Somehow, the illegal gestures away to Jenny's heart as the lovers consummate their damned union. But after some correctional coitus, Max calls and meets another ex-con by the name of Jerry Shue, played by legendary actor Harry Dean Stanton. Anyway, Shue lives a mundane middle-class suburban existence, but desperately wants to return to the lure of fast living and easy money. So the felonious fellows stake out the poker game they're set to rob, but their man Manny is late to the party to provide any guns, specifically a shotgun. The poker players began exiting and their odds at the $20,000 windfall seems underwhelming, but hope seems to arrive when Manny finally shows up, only to let them down that he came by without any weapons.
You stupid fucking cunt.
Broken, frustrated with another jerk-off wasting his time, the recidivism renegade decides to take matters into his own hands by breaking into the store next door to a pawn shop selling guns and hammering his way through drywall with all the caution of Andy Dufresne. But like the wrongfully accused convict, the guilty as charged convict has to tunnel his way the hard way to steal some firearms. And like that, his burglary skills prove successful, certainly more so than his previous crimes.
You're goddamn right.
Musty, dusty Dembo makes another appearance at his ditzy damsel's place as Jenny finally seems concerned about what she's dealing with and becomes emotional for the first time, afraid she might lose the worst thing in her life. But Jenny won't be the only one anxious when Max graduates from petty stick-ups to armed bank robbery.
Oh, shit!
Although Little Big Man overstays his welcome despite multiple pleas from his accomplice Jerry, it's another successful crime where they have enough money to make it rain. Man.
This nigga is so lame.
With newfound finance, Max celebrates his romance by casing a jewelry shop in Beverly Hills with his carefree girlfriend. But Jerry's anything but, as the stakes run too high for a clean getaway in such a ritzy place. Despite his reticence, the Nostromo crew member agrees to another felony, as the last thing they need is a getaway driver. And Jerry's reservations is warranted when their getaway driver is none other than Willie Darren. Not only is he a junkie, but he's the same junkie who got Max in trouble with the law that could have put him away for 2 to 3 years.
Unfucking-leapable.
Jerry is understandably upset about the choice, but money-making Max has his eyes on a prize in the face of ineptitude. So the dynamic duo arrive and get to business as the repo man sets a timer when to abscond. But just like before, Dembo ignores the countdown and continues patting his pockets. Jerry, irritated with his obstinacy, vows to never work with Max again. But the pretty and pink dad wouldn't know how right he'd be when Willie proves just how unreliable he is, leaving them in the lurch to Lamont on foot.
I'm telling you, it's very unfucking professional.
They'd run through alleys and backyards with police hot on their trail, while the marathon man has a head start hopping over the fence, as Jerry, in fight or flight, fends off the fuzz by shooting it out. But instead of finishing the job like Mr. White, Jerry winds up like Mr. Blue and ends up dying in a residence he could never afford.
Avenge me! Avenge me!
And Max is halfway there, shooting Jerry's killer cop as he peeks over the fence while mourning his friend's demise. As the Paris Texan perishes, Max catches the bus like Joe Buck and basically kidnaps Jenny at her job. And like such, Max uses her car for his own purposes as he fabricates a story about a bitch owing him some money. And that bitch in question is Willie Darren, as Max becomes as livid with him as a divorce from Meryl Streep. Although reaching his breaking point with the Point Break actor, a miffed and malcontent Max eventually cools off, forgives the erratic drug addict, and decides to patch things up with Silly Willie by giving the Big Bear a Big Bear hug.
Wrong.
After murderous Max avenged the death of his buddy, dangerous Dembo hightails it out of the tragic addict's palace, returns to his Stockholm Syndrome hostage, and listens to current events on the radio, detailing Jerry Shue's justifiable homicide and the attempted murder of the slain robber's critically wounded executioner. No longer comfortably standing idly by, the Bonington maxes Clyde one side of the ride, as she literally becomes sickened by the reality of all of his depravity.
I'm not happy.
But Dembo and the bimbo will reunite for one last time as they spend their dead-end date at a rest stop. Though there's no future with this loser, the brainwashed babe is still eager of being an accessory to Max's various crimes. But in his most selfless act, he spares the dumb hot chick from any further complicity as we view multiple mugshots of Max dating back to adolescence as he drives off into the unknown. And that's it. It's over.
Within the sound of silence.
Dustin Hoffman was originally set to direct after director Ulu Grosbard gave him the novel No Beast So Fierce to read. Hoffman became fascinated with an adaptation and acquired the film rights for his own Sweetwater Productions company. But after a few days of filming, Hoffman opted for Grosbard to direct, to dedicate his whole time and attention to delving into the complex role of an ex-con, even going so far as visiting Folsom prison and meeting Bunker, who was serving time for armed robbery. And very much like Max Dembo, the ex-con author committed a slew of crimes since childhood, including smashing a neighbor's backyard incinerator with a claw hammer at 3 years old, setting fire to a neighbor's garage at 4 years old, jamming a fork into a boy's eyeball at 15 years old, and at age 17, became the youngest inmate at San Quentin. During his incarceration with death row inmate Carol Chesman, who was writing his memoir Cell 2455 Death Row, Bunker, who dropped out of school in the 7th grade, became inspired to write like Chesman and other imprisoned scribes like Dostoevsky, notable for Crime and Punishment, and Miguel de Cervantes, famous for Don Quixote. But the aspiring writer, paroled at the age of 22, would not find success as a novelist for nearly 2 decades. But after catching his lucky break, Bunker originally co-wrote the first draft of Straight Time with Michael Mann, which would have been his first feature Hollywood gig after writing for shows like Starsky and Hutch and Police Story. Also co-writing at the time was Oscar-winning Coming Home screenwriter Nancy Dowd. Though both Mann and Dowd would go uncredited, the Thief director's relationship with the author left a lasting impact, with Mann using Bunker as the basis for John Voight Nate character in his LA crime epic Heat, and employing the Animal Factory writer as a prison technical advisor, teaching Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer, Tom Sizemore, Kevin Gage, and Dennis Haysbert on how to think and act like an ex-con. Despite flopping at the box office grossing about $10 million on a $4 million budget, the movie went on to win first prize at the San Mateo Video Festival in 1979, became film critic Gene Siskel's #1 pick for Best Film of the Year, and inspired movies like Raising Arizona, which features a mustachioed repeat offender in a highly dysfunctional romance, and Reservoir Dogs, another film involving a botched LA jewel heist that ends in catastrophe and murder. As for Straight Time, it's a taut crime drama with a bravura performance from its leading man, who had a brilliant decade with films like Little Big Man, Straw Dogs, Papillon, Lenny, All the President's Men, Marathon Man, and capping off the 1970s with Best Picture Oscar winner Kramer vs. Kramer, which won Dustin Hoffman the Best Actor Oscar. As for its co-stars, Emmet Walsh is just as terrific as the loathsome Lauren Visser, Harry Dean Stanton engrosses as the ex-con pal bored of the workplace drudgery, Gary Busey is far more restrained and understated than some of his latter manic roles he's known for, and Theresa Russell is passable as the pretty, naive innocent stuck in the middle. But in spite of all this praise, the movie isn't without its flaws. My biggest nitpick is when Max Dembo parks on the side of the freeway and handcuffs Earl Frank to the fence. Although it's my favorite scene and marks a pivotal moment for our anti-hero, the fence just magically appears like he summoned it out of wizardry. But overall, the movie has its redeeming qualities. For example, my favorite line is,
Now, we've been sitting here all fucking night waiting for the guy with the shotgun, and I'm telling you, it's very unfucking professional, all right?
It's a tremendous line made even more powerful during their last moments together, when Max carelessly steals more jewels after numerous warnings. Out of the 3 felons, Jerry was easily the most savvy and empathetic ex-con out of the trio, who elicited a scintilla of sympathy. Max and Willie, on the other hand, not so much. But hey, at least Jerry died doing what he loved. But altogether, it's a solid crime story with a timeless score by David Shire. Though it's vastly sanitized from its source material, which is fine in its own right and garnered plaudits from Tarantino and James Ellroy, its adaptation is a major improvement upon the deeply nihilistic tone, which worked better with John Voight in Runaway Train, another story about convicts co-written by Edward Bunker. If you're interested in other films about ex-cons, I'd recommend Carlito's Way, King of New York, The Getaway, Rafifi, Bob Le Flambert, The Killing, and Kansas City Confidential, which Tarantino cited as an inspiration for Reservoir Dogs. Well, that about does it for me.